Good morning and welcome. We have a little bit of feedback.
These were on. They're on.
Good morning and welcome to today's meeting. I would like to officially open the meeting at 9:31 a.m. and acknowledge that we are hosting this meeting on the traditional land of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We acknowledge the Aboriginal people as the traditional custodians of Western Australia, pay respects to elders past and present, and the ongoing connection between people, water, land and community. This meeting will be run in accordance with the DAP Standing Orders 2024 under the Planning and Development DAPS Regulation 2011. This meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the DAP website in accordance with Regulation 42A of the Planning and Development DAPS Regulation 2011. Members are reminded to announce their names and titles prior to speaking. Panel members may refer to technical devices throughout the meeting to assist them in considering the information before them. The members for today's meeting, to my furthest left is Councillor Blaine Bracken-Rich, member from City of Nedlands. To my immediate left is Councillor Kerry Smythe, member from City of Nedlands. To my furthest right is John Syme, Specialist Member. To my immediate right is Clayton Heim, Deputy Presiding Member. My name is Francesca Lafanti, Presiding Member. We have two apologies for today's meeting. They are Councillor Fergus Bennett and Councillor Rebecca Coghlan, both from the City of Nedlands. There are no members on leave of absence, and the minutes for this DAP meeting will be available on the DAP website. We are moving to part B of the meeting, and we do have a number of presentations associated with this item. First, I will go to declaration of due consideration. Members, can you have a show of hands that you've duly considered all matters in relation to this item? That is unanimous for the minute taker. Members, are there any disclosures of interest? And I note that there is a standing declaration of interest in the agenda in relation to if this matter has been considered at a council meeting, and that the local government members can acknowledge that in accordance with section 249 of the DAP Code of Conduct 2024, that they have declared that they have participated in a council meeting. However, under section 2.12, the members acknowledge they are not bound by any previous decisions or resolutions of the local government and undertake to exercise independent judgment in relation to the matters before them. Members from the local government of the City of Nedlands, have you considered this matter before at a council meeting, and do you have an interest disclosure?
Yes, Councillor Kerry Smythe, yes, I have a disclosure. This was considered at the council meeting on the 26th of November 2024, and I declare as been read out by the presiding member. Thank you.
Thank you. And
thank you, presiding member. I'm Councillor Blaine Bracken-Rich, and I declare that I am not bound by any previous decision or resolution by the City of Nedlands, and I will exercise independent judgment in relation to this DAP application.
Thank you. For the minute taker, I've considered this matter and have determined that there's no impartiality interest that would prevent either of these councils from participating or voting in this matter in relation to this DAP item. I now move forward to the item, and it's item 3.1, lot 102, number 95 Broadway in Nedlands, a mixed-use development of 60 multiple dwellings with an office tenancy. We have had presentation requests from 4 people. They have been approved for participation. I remind presenters to focus on the main aspects in the verbal presentation. All the written material has already been provided to members, and you have a 3-minute time frame in which to present. We have an order in here. Mr. Paul Simpson from Blueways, Mr. Ben Rees, Hassel, Mr. Andrew Bratt, I'm not going to pronounce this correct. Can you pronounce it for me again? Baranowski, thank you, from Plan E, and Mr. Daniel Lees from Element. I will now hand over to Paul Simpson, but you can change the order. Just advise who, if you change the order, who was speaking. Ismus. Is there? Yes.
Ready to go?
Yep.
Okay, thank you for that. Dear panel members, as noted in the city's RAR, a DA was approved for this site entailing a building of 38 apartments back in 2020. Despite that project being welcomed by intending buyers, where 2/3 of the apartments were actually sold off the plan at the time, the development didn't proceed due to the significant construction cost increases over 2020 to 2023 in particular. Members be aware of these circumstances also applying to the identically sized site at 87 to 89 Broadway, only 20 metres to the north of the site of the current application, which has a common development team and owners. A building entailing an additional 2 floors and greater plot ratio for that site was approved by DAP on 10th of September, 13 weeks ago. The application, the subject of the current RAR at 95 Broadway, is of virtually identical height, setbacks and plot ratio as the approved development at 87 to 89 Broadway. In fact, the current application entails most side and rear setbacks being slightly greater than the approved development. And those were the factors which were the principal focus of our discussions with the DRP and the DAP at that time. We've also recognised a new and emerging but clear demand for smaller dwellings, particularly in this quadrant of Nedlands, near UWA, QE2, and being well serviced by various bus routes. Of course, smaller dwellings means a lower price point. The proposed building has now grown to 60 dwellings, of which 20 are studio apartments, and 36 of the remaining 40 dwellings are 1- and 2-bedroom apartments, typically priced well less than $1 million. In these times of severe shortage of housing affordable to younger buyers, the proposed development presents a unique Western suburbs offering. The provision of a substantial number of ideally located, new quality dwellings, most of which are priced at less than 1/3 of the value of an average Nedlands home. Despite nearly 60% increase in the number of dwellings, the proposed development entails only 64 parking bays compared to the originally approved 70 bays. This recognises the previously mentioned excellent bus options, the ongoing growth in the use of services such as Uber, the high costs of car ownership, 1/3 of the development entailing studio apartments, and our knowledge of car ownership and usage levels at the nearby buildings we've developed at 139 Broadway and 5 Hillway. The proposed development again deploys the skills of leading architects. Hassel is highly aesthetically attractive and entirely consistent with the architectural theme of the originally approved building, whilst also being complementary to the architecture of the approved development at 89 Broadway. In summary, the proposed development entails a wide range of attributes and even enhancements in comparison to the adjacent DAP-approved development. We again hope for the panel members' support. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. We'll first go to this presenter. Are there any questions from this presenter at this juncture? If there are no questions at this juncture, we will move to the second presenter, Ben Rees.
And you. Screen one.
Thank you.
Oh, no, it's got the comment. Okay, thank you, panel members. Broadway is an evolving streetscape, and in terms of composition and materiality, this design is a considered response to both the existing character and the emerging context. Looking back, an eclectic mix of styles, scales, and materiality has built up over the last 100 years, with varying ground levels and setbacks creating kind of different visual impressions. The emerging character is a contemporary translation of that existing tapestry. Importantly, it takes advantage of the opportunity to create a more active ground plane, enlivened by shop fronts, entry lobbies, and rich planting. At the levels overlooking the street, a varied palette of quality materials, screening, and balconies further enlivens the area to strengthen that sense of place and community. Viewed in context, the scale and form of the proposal is consistent with the neighbouring schemes that have been approved by this panel. This sequence of 4 diagrams shows the approvable massing in blue and demonstrates how the proposal compares with that framework. It's well within the height envelope to the west side and somewhat encroaching to the east. Setbacks are broadly aligned, if not bettered, and any variations are minor. These ensure that we have good functional apartment layouts and realising the opportunity to provide more affordable housing product. This sequence of views moves progressively south and north of the development to demonstrate the visual impact of the uppermost level from the street. In terms of those pedestrian view lines, you can see that only the roof line of the upper level is visible, and this will be less visible to motor vehicle drivers with more limited sight lines. Diagrammatic analysis of the setbacks shows that the proposal is well within the envelope set out by the planning framework, or if it encroaches, it's relatively minor. Key points to the significant setbacks to the uppermost level, and that the proposal is 550 mil inside the framework envelope on the western side facing Kingsway. This analysis shows approved schemes encroaching into the setback envelope in a similar way. Reducing overlooking impacts on the rear adjoining site has been considered. This illustration demonstrates the proposal is similar to neighbouring improved schemes. The increased setback and mature vegetation on the western boundary and the use of balcony screens and opaque glass balustrades all serve to strike the right balance of privacy between neighbours. My colleague Andrew will speak to the landscape. And then overshadowing analysis demonstrates that the proposal is almost entirely consistent with that planning framework envelope and to Kingsway. So recognising the significant housing challenges we face in the state, the proposed development is obviously focused on delivering dwelling diversity and affordable product. And well-considered higher density developments actually serve to protect the surrounding context by providing more housing options without resorting to infilling of backyards and the continued compromise of the tree canopy. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Are there any questions from panel members? Yes, we'd like to member Plain Breakridge.
Yeah, just it was mentioned earlier that the setback had been increased from the original approved. The original approval, how much has been increased?
Oh, about 300 mil.
300.
We're talking, and I'm talking on the Kingsway
Yeah, on the Kingsway
side.
side.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just over half a metre inside of that approvable line. Yeah.
Are there any further questions at this juncture from panel members? Thank you. We will move through to our next presenter, Andrew Baranowski.
Thank you. Good morning, panel members. Thank you, presiding member, and hope you're having a good morning. Look, we're kind of excited to continue our involvement on this project, and I guess just noting that the landscape scheme was wholeheartedly endorsed with the DA approved in 2020. So I guess what I'd like to do is really focus on some of the improvements that we've been able to make through the replanning and design of the project. So key improvements really relate to approved entry foyer, creating a kind of a similar effect to what we've achieved at the other developments on Broadway and Hillway, internal planting, extra space, seating opportunities, so a great outcome from our point of view. The increased setback to Broadway has given us the opportunity to provide additional landscape plus seating opportunities, again, to help with the actual overall streetscape here. Additional verge planting as well as street trees on Broadway to help, again, soften the impact of the built form and provide shade for residents and visitors using the site. I think the relocation of the communal facilities to a more secluded location away from the private courts has been a good move, particularly from a practical and usability point of view. There was a concern about, and this has been found in other projects, where that relationship between private yards and communal spaces hasn't been well received. The introduction of those larger, more usable private courtyards to the west. Again, what that means is that we have now additional planting along that western side to enable the proposed screen trees and tree planting to flourish in that location. The introduction of the two large Christmas trees or semi-transplant Christmas trees to help kind of reinstate the quality of that space and again assist with the screening and overall amenity to that western elevation. In terms of landscape materials and quality, I note that the finishes, the materials, the look and feel, the planting palette, size of plants that go in, all the sustainability measures, irrigation strategies and overall maintenance requirements have been maintained as per the previous scheme. So we're very pleased with the level of detail that will be provided here. In terms of the design WA criteria, in terms of SPP 7.3, I note that the development is required to provide 176 square metres of DSA, which is 10%. The RAR clarifies that the proposed DSA currently equates to 8.5% of the site, or 1.5% less, which we don't believe is an issue. I note also that the DSA is the same as what you had approved in the 2020 DA proposal. And then, look, it was originally complemented, or the idea that the New Zealand Christmas tree was to be retained. Unfortunately, the tree was inadvertently removed by the demolition contractor. And if it had been retained, the requirement would only have been for 123.5 square metres of DSA. And as I note, the DSA is only 26 square metres short. I guess the other point to note is that
Andrew, you've gone over your 3 minutes. You're going to need to conclude your presentation.
Rightio. So I guess the main point I'd like to make is the RAR basically suggests that we need to include one large tree and at 64 DSA. And 2 at 36, which gives us 136 DSA, whereas we're proposing 5 trees, medium trees along that western elevation to give us at 30 square metres each.
Andrew, you will need to conclude. You have now gone over.
Okay.
So you'll have to conclude that.
Yep. So I guess really, I think that the proposal gives us a greater opportunity to provide a better solution, particularly for that western elevation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Members, are there any questions at this juncture? Yes, to Member Blaine at Brackenridge.
Yeah, thank you. My question is, we love our trees in there.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's a pity we couldn't get that 10%, but you're providing 8.5%.
Yeah.
But I did notice in your notes that you said there was 175 square metres of unrequired non-compliant tree canopy. Could you just explain what that is?
So essentially, because we have a range of planters essentially on structure, to the various community areas and on the various decks. So what we've been able to achieve is additional landscape on structure, or deep DSA on structure, to give us that opportunity to put in the additional trees, as noted, Councillor. Yep.
So they are what, small trees, or what's
combination of medium and small trees. So we've got, and part of that is where we've got communal dining spaces and communal areas. We've introduced citrus, for example. So they're classified as a small tree, but still provides a level of amenity and a level of opportunity for residents to kind of engage with those spaces.
Thank you.
Thank you, members. Are there any other questions?
Just, I can.
Yes.
Andrew, you said 1.5% less, but it's actually about 15% less the total required, isn't it?
So sorry, yeah, so 100%, yeah, absolutely. I'll put the dot in the wrong spot, so it's 15% less. Yeah. Thanks for picking that up, Clayton.
Pleasure.
Is there any further questions? I have some questions. Can you go through the rear deep soil area?
Yes.
Specifically in the context of height and time frame to reach that height. And
yes.
I have a similar question in the context to planning in relation to the interface and the amenity, essentially regarding how does that treat the adjoining amenity in terms of privacy and overlooking. So I'd like some clarity about the rear landscaping deep soil.
Yep.
Because I note on plan, and I am looking at your plan, it is level 2 Rev K.
Yeah. Do you want to pull that up on the screen, Dan? Or look, I think the beauty with this is, as I mentioned, because they're private courtyards now. So essentially, majority of that rear setback is now soft landscape. In other words, deep soil. So what we're proposing in there is five trees. 2 transplant New Zealand Christmas trees, Metrosideros, which will be, when they go in, about 4 to 5 metres in height from day one. And then the tuckeroos, Cupaniopsis, are earmarked as 300 litres, so they will already be in the range of 3 metres in height when they grow in. I do note that the boundary to the western boundary to 95 has got quite a lot of existing tree planting through there. And then in response to your question on timing, the Cupaniopsis is a relatively quick growing tree. So I would imagine in say 5 seasons, 5 years, they will achieve sort of 8 to 9 metres in height. By about a 5 metre width canopy. I have them in the apartment development that we did at my place, and after 10 years, they're around about the 10 metre mark.
Thank you. My next question, and it may not be you, it may fall to other members of the team. I'm interested in understanding the permanency and the maintenance of a landscaping area that is provided to us as part of the information in terms of an amenity and protection of privacy that is in the private domain. So what are the mechanisms to ensure the information that we have here can be relied upon in relation to addressing amenity and privacy matters?
Andrew, I'm happy to answer that one.
Great, thanks, Paul.
Yeah. Thank you, Presiding Member. In fact, this is a good question, and the same question that was asked in respect to 87 to 89 3 months ago. It's written into the bylaws of every buyer's contract to buy an apartment that they're obliged to provide access to our landscaping company. In fact, Tim Davis Landscaping will be handling our projects, and in fact, they're at the other one down the road at 139 today. So once this goes in, the owner isn't allowed to change any of the plantings in there, and they're obliged to provide access to TDL or to whichever landscape company is appointed by the strata manager to look after both the retic and the health of the plants, fertilisation and the like. So that applies not only to to across the back where we've got on screen at the moment, but any other garden such as the 4 apartments at the front there, and the ones on level 6 where we've got quite a big planter right across the back of the building, providing privacy. So, and we've done exactly the same down at Rivian at 139 Broadway and Hillway at 5 Hillway, where it's written into the strata bylaws that owners have to provide access. So the date of that is given to the owners 2 or 3 weeks in advance, and then they come in and maintain it. And the owners aren't allowed to change any of the plants, and whether they've got a green thumb and want to maintain them or not themselves, they're looked after by an external landscaping company, and that's built into their strata fees.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add to presiding member that we prepare a very detailed maintenance manual that goes with the project. So whoever does maintain basically has got a weekly schedule in terms of what they need to do and when. So that we believe ensures that you get a good quality outcome for the life of the project. Thank you.
I'd also just add to that, presiding member, if I may, condition 7 of the alternate recommendation. I think there's sufficient enforcement powers in the wording of that condition, which requires the landscaping areas to be maintained on an ongoing basis for the life of the development to the satisfaction of the City of Nedlands. I suggest there's sufficient bit of power there for the City to ensure that what has just been set out in terms of the expectations for maintenance of tree canopy and planting generally across the project will be maintained.
Thank you. Are there any further questions at this juncture from members? No. Thank you. We will move on to our last presenter, Mr. Daniel Lees.
Thank you. So, good morning, DAP members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this architecturally designed, predominantly residential building that will contribute 60 apartments across a diversity of studio, 1, 2 and 3 bedrooms to this evolving activity centre. In September this year, as Paul Simpson has said, this panel approved a highly similar 8-storey building at 87 to 89 Broadway, which is 2 properties to the north. And we respectfully request your approval again today. Since the gazettal of the planning scheme in 2019, Broadway has been rapidly evolving as per the targeted infill and urban growth area designations of the local planning strategy, with numerous contemporary apartment buildings having been approved, ranging from 6 to 8 storeys. A 9-storey building is currently under consideration by state government 170 metres to the northeast on Fairway through an alternate development approval pathway. All of this speaks to the emerging context, scale and form of development in this locality, which we say this proposal at 8 storeys comfortably sits within. This streetscape view here shows the consistent active podium interface to Broadway. These varied heights of the emerging streetscape add to the richness and visual interest along Broadway and clearly show the context of the 8-storey building under construction at number 79 to 81, the highly similar 8-storey building approved in September at number 87 to 89, and the 7-storey building immediately to the north at number 91. Whilst I've described this building as 8 storeys as viewed from the street, the city's report technically describes it as 7 storeys, given that more than half of the ground floor is built into the natural ground level rise from Broadway. In this regard, the proposal can be considered a single-storey height variation from the 6 storeys of the RAC coding. Notwithstanding, this massing study, which is on the screen here, demonstrates, in our view, how we see this building largely fitting within the 21-metre primary height control of the R-codes, particularly at that rear western elevation, I should say, which is arguably the more sensitive of the interfaces. The proposed built form is a direct response to the current housing supply issues and the state government's targeted infill objectives and their specific interest in this locality, as evidenced by the Minister for Planning's approval of an improvement plan, 2021-2023, 2023-2025, 2024-2025, 2025-2026, 2025-2027, 2025-2028, 2025-2029, and the 7-storey building immediately to the north at number 91. Whilst I've described this building as 8 storeys, as viewed from the street, the and his commentary on the critical need to deliver housing in this area and elsewhere in Perth. The side and rear setbacks are broadly consistent with those approved in September at the building at 87 to 89. And this proposal provides a side setback interface to number 91 to the north that essentially mirrors the progressive setting back of this level, or the levels, I should say, to reflect the base, middle and top typology. The building to the south at number 97 is a strata title commercial building. This site, we say, is particularly well located, 70 metres from Broadway Shopping Centre. These 60 apartments will be very well provided for with access to public transport, walkable food and convenience shopping, the Swan River, recreation facilities and key places of education and employment in the broader area. And in closing, this medium scale apartment building, we say, is entirely consistent with this emerging character along Broadway, buildings that are approved, under construction and completed. In this respect, we would request your approval today.
Thank you for your presentation. Members, are there any questions to this presenter?
Yes.
Yes, Member Kerry Smythe.
Thank you. Daniel, I've got a question about your email about the sustainability condition 27, where it's been said in the email that the power doesn't exist to have this minimum 5-star Green Star rating. So I want to ask, can't you aspire to this? And because it will inevitably come into existence. So yeah, so what do you want done here, and why can't you go for the 5-star?
Sure. I guess I'll preface my answer to say I'm not a sustainability consultant, so I really can't talk in too much detail as to the intricacies of how one achieves a 5-star rating. However, my email was observing that this condition and the city's local planning policy from which this condition is derived, in my view, is seeking to vary the acceptable outcomes of the residential design code with respect to energy efficiency or sustainability. The R code makes it clear that this can only be done, a variation to this particular element objective of the R code or acceptable outcome of the R code can only be done with the approval of the WA Planning Commission, which I understand has not been obtained at this point in time. So there are sustainability measures which have been designed into this building, and these are set out in the sustainability management strategy, which is one of the attachments to the RAR. So consistent with the building that has been approved at 87 to 89, so the sustainability statement is attachment number 10 to the RAR. That outlines a number of measures that are being undertaken, including the solar PV array on the roof, and a number of measures designed into the building, which we believe sufficiently address the element objectives of the R codes. On this basis, we don't see it being appropriate to be requiring a 5-star Green Star or equivalency certification as per condition 27.
Thanks. I will ask the same question of the staff when we get to that administration. But just for clarity, are you wanting that reworded, or do you want it taken out?
My request would be that it's omitted from the approval today, so deleted entirely. On the basis that sustainability has been considered and the sustainability statement that that's part of the application, we say adequately addresses sustainability.
Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Yes, John Simon.
On that particular point, your Stantec report gives you an ATHERS rating of 7.5, which is pretty high. And we're getting into juggling regimes, sustainability regimes. And I'm not also a sustainability at this level. How does the 7.5 ATHERS rating relate to a 5-star? What's the difference, perhaps?
John?
And
I should know the answer
is
to
this
that
a
question,
simple
but I
fix?
apologise, I don't know.
Some say that it's equivalent to what you've already done. I mean, it seems to me you've gone a long way down the track anyway, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the NatHERS is specific to energy efficiency, whereas Green Star is a more holistic rating system that considers a lot of different characteristics that all come together to achieve a sustainability outcome. And it's done on a points-based system. So you can gain points in some areas and not others, and essentially you need to get an aggregate number of points to achieve either a 4-star or a 5-star outcome. So they're kind of two different systems. I don't know if there's a specific kind of crosswalk, I say, between NatHERS and Green Star. Some of the measures that we're doing would automatically gain us certain credits on the Green Star sort of rating tool. But yeah, I can't, I'm not a sustainability expert myself, so I don't know exactly how much the points from NatHERS would influence the Green Star outcome. But as you said, 7.5 NatHERS is a good rating from an energy efficiency point of view. There are other measures that we're doing here, as noted, in terms of the PV arrays, the planting, and a lot of those, I suppose, health and well-being considerations in terms of occupancy comfort and outdoor space, outlook. All those kind of things tend to come together to form a good rating in respect of Green Star, albeit it's increasingly more onerous as the years go by. One thing I would say is that the Green Building Council are take a very dim view of all equivalency ratings because it actually undermines their rating tool. So they don't really support saying 5-star, Green Star or equivalent because there's no teeth to actually enforce that rating system. So it's kind of, it's all or nothing in a sense if you're going to go for a Green Star rating.
Perhaps I could add to Ben's answer there as well. Again, I'm not a sustainability expert, but have worked on various project teams with sustainability experts. The comment has been made that if one elects to pursue a Green Star rating, that is a decision that needs to be made on day one, day zero of the project in terms of designing it into absolutely everything from the architecture to the services strategy and everything. As Ben has said, Green Star is a very holistic ratings tool. So on that basis, I think it's highly challenging, not impossible, to effectively, dare I say, retrofit a requirement for a Green Star rating onto a project as a condition of planning approval. It really would have need to have been decision taken on day one of the project to say we will be targeting a Green Star rating of 4 or 5 stars or a given rating, and the project pursued on that basis, because these points that one achieves to get a particular star rating are across a variety of categories, and that really needs serious consideration. So in that respect, if the city's policy were in place and if it had achieved the approval of the Planning Commission, as I believe is required as a departure from the residential design codes, or in fact setting a higher standard than what the residential design codes require, then that would be known, and proponents could make an informed decision when they're starting to formulate proposals for projects. Whereas this very much has been, I suppose, come through at the 11th hour, so to speak, and it's really just not possible to achieve a 5-star Green Star rating for a project at this point of its design life.
So just to follow up on that, element 4.15 of SPP 7.3 refers to NatHERS, not Green Star.
That's correct.
Yes. So NatHERS is sort of locked into the planning framework at that level.
That's right. That's the known. That's what the project has been designed to. Yes.
And John, just adding to that, the target for Hassel beginning was to get minimum 7. We've got 7.5, and as you pointed out, that's already quite high. You rarely see much higher than that. And so that's more on the energy efficiency side. As distinct from, there's a little bit more of a focus on sustainability in the NatHERS, in the Green Star. But if we knew that we had to get Green Star at the beginning, as Dan suggested, we would have that would have been the brief for Hassel, but it wasn't a requirement. So but we wanted to get NATers, and we've achieved and exceeded our objectives there. So in terms of energy efficiency.
Can I
Thank you.
just
Yes.
add to that? The wording of 27, it starts with prior to the issue of a building permit. So that would suggest that it is possible, because that's the requirement of that condition, that it's to do with the building permit, not retrospectively affecting the planning.
Well, the building permit could be applied for very shortly, but we in order to achieve five-star Green Star now, we have to redesign the building before we apply for the building permit. But it's already been designed over the last, well, originally 6 years ago, and now a couple of extra floors and smaller apartments. And so we can't redesign the building if we were to apply for building permit in a few weeks' time.
So you're saying this is a surprise? You didn't
Correct.
know about this before?
It wasn't a requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Yes.
I think I know the answer to this, but I'm interested in your take on the DRP's comments about built form and scale, where they say the proposal is seeking discretion for plot ratio and building height without providing exemplary outcomes. It just seems to be so much at odds with where you're coming from and where the DRP are coming from.
Well, there's a number of members of the DRP, and I think it's fair to say that that wasn't the necessary consensus. That was the outcome of the final report from the DRP, but a number of the members were quite happy with the building, and so I think the course of the bulk and scale were above the 2.0 plot ratio. There was an obligation to point out that the bulk and scale were excessive, and then we asked at the DRP meeting what else we could possibly do to achieve this exemplary, and there was a lot of blank faces, and I'm sure Lane, as an architect, would appreciate the fact that there's only a certain amount you can do, and everyone agreed it's a good-looking building. It's ticking a lot of boxes, and so we said, well, what else can we possibly do? And no one had an answer for us. So it's a bit difficult to go back and address it.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
No.
I have a question. Whoever in the team wishes to answer it, can you talk through the plot ratio, which speaks to bulk form scale? And I'm interested in your comments in relation to, from a planning perspective, discretion should be granted for such a variation. I note that you're seeking a 2.92, and I think the previous one, just in terms of context, which was in the street, is 2.79. I think they were the numbers. So I'm interested in your comments in relation to, from a planning perspective, why this panel should grant discretion, which speaks to the issue of, say, bulk and scale and form.
And I'll just have one little preface, and then I'll let you get into it. Presiding member, what we've achieved here is this is technically a greater plot ratio than the building that was approved 20 metres away. But in fact, we've fit that plot ratio in a building which is actually smaller. So it's the building height's the same, the side and the rear setbacks are greater. So what we've done is achieved a more efficient building, not a bigger building than what's already been approved. It's actually slightly smaller if you were to multiply the height with the depth. So it's a matter of efficiency. So we talked about the plot ratio. It was, as you point out, 2.79 was approved 20 metres away, and this building is actually smaller.
Is there any further comments you wish to make?
Yeah, look, I'd add to that, and I think the city acknowledged it in the report. I mean, plot ratio is a tool. It's one way to measure the bulk and scale of a building. It is a number, somewhat of an abstract thing. I think what's more apparent, and I think this is clear in some of the streetscape elevations and context renders that were on screen during my presentation and during Ben's presentation. It's about the look and the feel of this building when one sees it in the street. And I'm firmly of the view that those renders show this building sitting comfortably within the street, within Broadway, which has fairly rapidly evolved in terms of what it has been and in terms of what it is going to be and what it is evolving into now in terms of 8-storey buildings that have been approved and under construction. So I think plot ratio is just one form of measurement that the R codes uses, but I think what's more relevant is gaps between buildings, articulation, how one perceives buildings when moving down the street, the level of visual interest, the elevations, materiality, and aesthetics and landscaping, for example. The aesthetics in particular was something that the design review panel was supportive of.
Thank you. Note that you spoke principally about the streetscape. There were no comments about a bulk of scale in terms of form as it relates to side and rear, and obviously the property has other boundary interfaces. And I note that the RA speaks to, particularly in terms of amenity impacts and increasing of setbacks. So could you speak to, again, anyone on your team can speak to, again, it's back to the same primary question regarding plot ratio. Plot ratio does deal with bulk and scale, and the RA speaks to those elements on the upper level as being impactful on those other interfaces.
I will start with the side setbacks. I mentioned in the deputation, one of the images shows the side-by-side an elevation that includes this building and the approved building to the north. The setbacks are broadly consistent between two buildings, and it achieves the gap between buildings and the base, middle and top typology that the R codes calls for the RAC3 coding, which is achieved through the podium level built to both side boundaries. Building, which is a setback, and then the greatest setback for the uppermost level, the use of different colours and materials to the penultimate level processive appearance to it. So it's consistent with what has been approved immediately to the north, and then again 2 properties to the north at 79 to 81 Broadway in terms of side boundary setbacks. As for the rear boundary setback, there's some commentary on this from Andrew and some questions of Andrew. We have intentionally located the deep soil area along the rear boundary. That's consistent with the City of Nedlands policy. I think that is the right place to put deep soil area in terms of serving to mitigate the impact of bulk and scale and mitigate the impact between the change in density codes between the RAC3 of Broadway and the lesser coding on Kingsway to the rear. So the location of deep soil area along our rear boundary, and which Andrew has said allows for the planting of the 5 medium trees, and he made some comments as to canopy width and tree height within a 5-year establishment period of 8 to 9 metres, and tree height and canopy spread of 5 metres per tree. It was slide number 24 in the pack, which had a render view of the rear setback, showing those trees performing a screening function. And in fact, some of the slide number 23, the one before, which is looks to be a drone shot, which picks up the extensive vegetation in the backyards of those Kingsway properties and the very significant backyards of those Kingsway properties, because those houses have very significant setbacks themselves. So we feel we have done an appropriate regard to the transition and to provide mitigation of the bulk and scale of this building, the rear neighbours to Kingsway.
Could you make some further comments? I note the RA refers to not just the lower levels, but the upper levels in terms of the interface and the privacy. You spoke specifically about the rear setback privacy being managed through the landscaping. The landscaping has won some time to grow, but also are you suggesting that that is the primary interface amenity mechanism that you want us to take into consideration?
Well, in addition to landscaping, there are also the privacy screens, which are notated, sorry, they're just on the prior drawing. This one. The privacy screens at item 2, as well as the opaque glazing to the balustrading, and then at the penultimate level there, number 3, which provides that landscaped edge to those terraces, and then the level above that, the final level is further set back. So those design features, as well as the conscious decision to put deep soil area along the rear boundary and to plant those medium trees, which is item 4 on the slide, are key design features that have been employed to serve to mitigate volume scale and maintain privacy.
Thank you. Those are my questions. At this juncture, are there any other questions from panel members? Yes, John Syme, and then we're going to Clayton Hine.
Just a couple of probably more technical ones. The access or the ramping, it's my understanding that normally a flat section at the top of the ramp before you get to the property boundary into the street. It's not shown on this, and if you are required to do that, would that change the gradient to an extent that would be difficult to achieve?
So there would be a kind of a rounding at the top of that that ramp, and also at the bottom too. And so no, with the gradient is actually quite well within what's acceptable. So you can get a much steeper gradient. We'll try to keep it as shallow as possible, but there's certainly, yes, in the detail.
And the other question relates to, I think there's a comment about the swept paths of vehicles, the waste vehicles interfering with the parking bay. Can you comment on that, whether that's going to be easy to remedy?
We certainly, this is a, dare I say, slight difference of opinion between the city's traffic engineers and the traffic and waste consultant on the project team, but we're comfortable with the condition in the alternate recommendation, and that yeah, we can make it work.
So, thank you.
John Syme.
Yeah, just a couple of quick ones. That general strategy you've got on the west boundary, is that similar to the one in 89? We're looking at pretty much the same elevate, same strategy.
Identical.
Yeah. So we've got screens and
Yes.
class as approved up the road. Correct.
Those planters on the top, the planter is already about 1 metre high, and then 600.
Yeah, I understand the top ones.
Yeah, okay.
It's the ones.
Yeah, the
three to five, which
they're pretty much identical.
The same, yeah.
Also, can I just, I'm intrigued by that comments you made about it being an efficient building. I'm just looking at the relationship between plot ratio and building envelope. Are you arguing, and I'm just looking at plot ratio diagrams here, that your circulation spaces are fairly minimal on levels between 2 and 7 actually. The plot ratio is taking up most of the building envelope at those levels. So that's what you mean by efficiency.
Well, actually, John, it's a combination of things. It's because we've got 20 studio apartments, and as you appreciate, the balconies for ones and studios are smaller than if you've got, say, 2 and 3 bedders, which the original approval was predominantly. And where typically, if you're looking at a 2 or 3 bedder, we're trying to get a depth of about 3 metres for a balcony. When you're looking at a smaller apartment, we're finding that 2.5 metres is adequate to get a 900 wide table, chairs on either side, and still have. So we don't want to go less than 2.5 metres, but for bigger apartments, we don't like to go less than 3 metres. So the outside of the building is stayed where it is, and then in terms of the balcony position, that in fact the walls on the smaller apartments moved 500 mil out, and that's where the additional plot ratio was achieved, just through slightly smaller balconies. But still adequate for the size of the apartment.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from panel members? Thank you. If not, we will move to officers. from the city, if officers would like to come forward. We'll have some opportunity for both officers and members. Officers, I'm not sure who would like to initially start some comments and presentations, so I'll hand it over to you. Just let me know who would like to start, and then we'll go to questions from the panel. Over to yourself. Thank you.
I may make a brief start, so I'd just like to echo the comments that have been aired by our councillors this morning.
Sorry. So you'd like to introduction, please.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was already. Bruce Thompson, I'm the Director of Planning at Nedlands City Council. So firstly, on sustainability. So the presentation earlier on included the streetscape along Hampton Road, which shows the new paradigm of these developments in Hampton Road, which
Sorry, just speak a little bit up. I can't hear it clearly now.
yes. So the new paradigm of these apartments of 7 to 8 stories, and they fully occupy the sites, and they remove a lot of tree canopy in the city. And just go back to the comments made by Councillor Brackenbridge that trees are something that are loved by the City of Nedlands, and it's renowned as a leafy suburb. And so part of the discussion I would like to add to is that the development, I think, would benefit by the inclusion of some significant deep soil trees, at least 4. So I'd like to put that forward, and then with the sustainability, I think aspiring to a higher level of measure in the sustainability world would be of benefit, and that NAFERS is a minimal energy spectrum only, and that Green Star in the future should be something that we look to in our developments that are occurring in the city. So Green Star is a process that we went through at Murdoch University to deliver Builder Catagen, which is a 6 Green Star rated building. So it's a more broad, more comprehensive method of evaluation of a project, not just based on energy consumption. So thank you, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Any other comments you wish to make in relation to the RAL? Thank you. We'll go to questions from panel members. Panel members, are there any questions to city officers?
Yes.
Yes, we'll go to.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. My question relates to the question I asked of the proponents about condition 27 and the Green Star rating. I know that you haven't been involved at the early stages of this, and I was wondering about if you can comment about it not being raised as a requirement early enough for it to be considered in the planning stage, and what action you think is possible to take to meet that condition 27 at the building licence approval stage.
Okay. To a certain extent, I agree with the components in the Green Star process is a all-inclusive design process which should be incorporated at the earliest stage. City in the future, if it wants to go down that path, be explicit about the duration of achieving Green Star rating at the earliest possible time. And the current regulations the NAFERS ratings of mandatory, as I understand, which is what the proponents have met at a reasonably high level, 7.5.
Thank you. And if I could ask another.
Yes, you can.
The recommendation of the RAR is for a deferral, as you know. What do you think will be able to be achieved in that deferral period that will be of great benefit to the city?
Sure. Yeah. I think that really the purpose of the deferral is to focus on, so there's a couple of key elements. In terms of the build form, I would say it's the setbacks from the rear and probably as well as the sides on level 5 and to some extent level 6. I think there can be some improvement in the street setback as well to sort of help soften the development. I think in terms of the balcony provision, the report talks about how essentially the balconies for some of the two-bedroom rather apartments are, I guess, not nearly as big as they should be relative to other apartments in the building. So I take the applicant's point that essentially the plot ratio has increased because the balconies have stayed where they are, but the walls have increased. Perhaps the walls should actually be brought back to where they were in the previous iteration, because that will essentially provide for a larger balcony, greater amenity for the occupants. I think that a bit more landscaping or I guess a reduction, it has to be potentially in the basement to allow for more deep soil. I'd say those would be the 3 key aspects.
So with the 140 days rather than 90 days, why have you gone for such a long period of time? And do you think it's achievable in a lesser time?
Sure, 140 days was calculated essentially on the basis that, I guess, because of the time of the year, in terms of if a deferral is committed to today, obviously there is some sort of just natural delays with the holiday period. The days are also calculated on the basis that it would sort of target the City of Nedlands March Ordinary Council meeting for consideration of the Responsible Authority report. I think that gives sufficient time for the applicants to consider design changes.
Thank you. Are there any further questions?
Just a follow-up question on the comment about a reduction in the basement. How can that be achieved without fundamentally affecting the basement and the circulation?
I mean, well, it might have to be achieved through the reduction in car parking, which then might have to be achieved through a reduction in dwellings. So it might result in a fundamental design change, but I don't see how that.
Which in effect could be a refusal.
Well, do you mean the recommendation should
So,
be a refusal or?
A deemed refusal, because it's so fundamental in terms of how it affects this development.
Well, I mean, it essentially it's essentially the same as, or it's equivalent to reducing the setbacks. The dwellings would decrease, setbacks would decrease, and subsequent parking would decrease.
Okay.
The size of the basement would decrease.
Any further questions from members? I have a question. I'm not sure who can respond to it. Just for context for yourself, I'm on element 2.2, building heights, page 17 of the RAR, not necessarily of the electronic document. In there, and on paragraph 2, I'm referring to, just I don't know if you've got it in front of you. It talks about the element objective and specifically referring to height not being compatible with the desired future character of the area and does not appropriately respond to topography. The commentary in this section of the report talks about the local planning strategy, which identifies the form and future emerging character. However, my question in that context goes to the following. The strategy was adopted in 2017, which speaks to this. The scheme was adopted in 2019, and the R code provisions, in terms of the apartment provisions, looks at this or defines it as not a low to medium rise centre. It's more of a medium rise urban centre. Can you provide some commentary? And this goes to the question of the streetscape and the context of it in relation to building form and scale as it relates to the street.
Sure. So sorry, would you like clarification in terms of how the strategy is interacting now with the R coding that's imposed by the scheme?
What I'm trying to get at is that you've referenced the future and emerging character of this particular area, referred to a strategy which has been progressed further by a series of other planning documents. And what I'm trying to do is understand the relevance and importance of that in the context of the other planning framework documents that also apply to this site.
Sure. Well, obviously, the local planning strategy is, from a strategic perspective, sort of overarching. And so the precincts policy, the local planning policy 5.14, sort of been prepared, I guess, subsequent to that strategy, or in sort of as a support document to that strategy. And the local planning policy, I guess, reinforces the idea that it should be a medium-rise center. And that's also reinforced by the idea that the RAC3 code is a medium-rise density code. So essentially, the way I see it, the policy suite envisions essentially around 6 stories as a maximum for all the buildings in the locality.
So my follow-up question is that your policy, and I'm specifically talking about LPP 5.14,
Yep.
And it talks in the context of Broadway, and it refers to the topographical differences, but it actually talks about Broadway mix, and the new development massed should be towards Broadway to account for that topographical mix, which would, on the plans we've got, shows the development form, the higher component of it above the 21 metres is towards the Broadway. So I'm trying to reconcile some of these documents with some of the comments that you've made in the RA in relation to form and height, noting that the height principally sits towards the Broadway side on the plans that we've got in our RA. Do you have any additional comments in terms of that?
Yeah. So my I guess, interpretation or my application of that that wording in the policy is that, like, first of all, there should be essentially like a massing at the lower levels towards Broadway to create sort of that bit of continuous urban fabric, some streetscape activation, which obviously the development achieves. And then in terms of the massing towards Broadway, I also feel like that is supposed to interact with the idea that the interface to the rear is really supposed to be very sensitively managed in terms of the setback should really progress as the building increases in height away from Kingsway towards Broadway. So there should be essentially sort of 6 meters at the upper story, and then you're talking about 9 meters, sorry, at the front on the upper stories, and then 9 meters at the back on the upper stories, which essentially achieves a massing towards Broadway away from Kingsway.
Thank you. That were my questions. Is any further questions from panel members? There are no further questions. Thank you for your participation. We will move back to the agenda. Move back to the agenda. There is a recommendation at the beginning of the agenda. Is there a mover for the RA recommendation at the beginning of the agenda? It is moved, Kerry Smythe. Is there a seconder for the RA recommendation for deferral? For the minute taker, the motion has lapsed. There is no seconder. We move forward on the agenda. As members are aware, there's been an alternate recommendation provided as part of an R13 request. Is there a mover of the alternate recommendation as provided to members? It is moved, John Sy. Is there a seconder for the alternate recommendation? It is seconded, Clayton Hine. Would the mover like to speak to the item?
Yes, thank you. Look, there are a series of discretionary items here which are being asked for by the proponent, and the city quite helpfully has listed those as things of their concern. And they are reasonable concerns to have, but they all have to do with height, street setbacks, transition, setbacks to the rear and so on. I think that in a package, they are all they all add up to minor departures from the planning framework. And I think that's been illustrated quite eloquently by the proponent. There are some and I say that as being these are the primary issues primary items at issue here. I think it seems to be general agreement that this is a very nicely designed building. I think it's been very well resolved. I think it's important that developments of this type are built at this time, and I think the ripple effect of in the general housing market and the general property supply actually it goes quite deep. It goes right to the metropolitan area as a consequence of providing this type of accommodation. I do particularly like the relatively high proportion of relatively affordable accommodation. I think the argument that's put forward by the proponent on that, I think, is a sound one. So I think for all those reasons, as a general proposition, this building is a very attractive one, a very good one, and very well designed. I think that the general set of variations which are being asked here are reasonable ones. They add up to much. They are relatively minor. I think that the issues of any minor changes there might be as a consequence of the fraud, I don't think would change the outcomes either way. So it'd be a pointless exercise and one which is actually quite damaging to the building for no purpose. So for those reasons, I think that this is quite an approvable project. I think it is well enough, well mannered to its neighbours, both to the rear and to either side. It does, I think, fit very nicely into the streetscape. I think it is probably a fairly, this and its partner up the road in 89 really are quite important elements in what I think is emerging in Broadway as being quite a handsome boulevard. And we can only sort of guess what the outcomes of the improvement plan would be, but I think it's a fair assumption that more of this type of development, scale of development, is going to be common on both sides of Broadway, in which case we end up with quite a handsome boulevard in a way which is actually hard to achieve in this type of environment. So for those reasons, I think this is quite approvable. I would foreshadow the other things is the landscaping. Landscaping, I think, is fundamentally compliant. So I don't think there's an issue here. It's quite high quality landscaping. I do foreshadow an amendment to exclude condition 27, but we'll get to that.
We'll deal with the amendment now.
All right. Well, I would like to complete condition 27.
Amendment 1 is moved by Member John Syme, seconded by Member Clayton Hine, and it's the deletion of condition 27. Would the mover like to speak to it?
Look, the NATA's arrangements are embedded in the planning framework, the current planning framework, the R codes. They are not embedded in the Green Star is not embedded in the planning framework at all. I do take the point that Green Star is a worthy thing, but you can't have both. I think the planning framework finds NATA's as being quite acceptable. We have a Stantec report saying, which is we're going to end up with very high outcomes in that. I think if you combine that with quite good landscaping and so on, we've got something which would be approaching what you'd end up with a Green Star rating anyway, and therefore the condition 27 I think is A, superfluous, and B, really outside of the plan.
Would the seconder like to speak to Amendment 1?
I agree entirely with what the mover has
Thank you. Are there any other members that wish to speak to Amendment 1, which is the deletion of condition 27?
Could you just remind me, condition 27?
I've got it here. This might be easier if I show it
It's
to
a
you.
sustainability one.
27. That's it, just there. Yeah. So we're just holding for a moment, just for members to, they're just taking a bit of time to grab it up on the board, on their computers. This is 27. Just holding for a minute to enable the members to get to the correct point. Okay. Any other members who wish to speak to Amendment 1? There are no further speakers. We move back to the mover for right of reply and close of debate on Amendment 1.
Nothing further, thanks.
Amendment 1 is the deletion of condition 27. We are going to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Is carried 4-1 for the minute taker. Minute taker, did you get the members for and the members against? Mover, would you like to continue speaking?
No, thank you. That's it.
The seconder like to speak to the item.
Thank you. Yes, I am fully supportive of the proposal as presented. I give due regard to the policy 5.14 and the planning framework, but I believe that or there can mount an argument quite easily to say that this proposal fits within that framework. The reference to future and emerging character, I think that's already arrived. I think that is now the character of Broadway. So as John has said, this is a very nicely designed building. It presents well to the street and forms a really good part of that streetscape. In terms of the landscaping, while it would have been nice perhaps to see a little bit more deep soil area, I do accept that what has been shown will work and provide a good screen or opportunity to screen from Kingsway side. What's the other point I wanted to make? In terms of the side setbacks or the scale of the development, I think the presentation from the proponent showed that they are really quite minor and that scale of the development and those setbacks will work in that location and not impact unduly on neighbouring properties. So with all that in mind, I fully support the proposal as recommended.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Are there speakers against the proposal? Sorry, Member Kerry Smith.
Thank you. Look, I am going to speak against it because I was supportive of the deferral, so that the aspects that were brought up in the RAR of height, setback, landscape, balcony size, parking layout and sustainable design could be improved. At the City of Nedlands, in the last 6 or so years since the approval of the Local Planning Scheme 3, the city has worked extremely hard to develop its planning framework and the precinct plans to reflect the aspirations that the City of Nedlands is leading with and leading across the City of Perth in regard to its sustainable and livable outcomes. And I support that approach, and I think that we've got to try hard in every front to make that improvement, to make that distinction. And for that reason, I would have preferred that extra time was given to make those improvements so that we did have an even better boulevard than what is emerging. So for that reason, I will not vote to approve this. I would have in March had those improvements been made, because I do believe it's, overall what's emerging along Broadway is, a remarkable place, and we should maintain our standards to get it as good as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers on this proposal? I will speak to the proposal. I'm supportive of the proposal. Many of the comments have already been said. From my view, it is consistent with the planning framework, and I am satisfied that the proposal meets and it's consistent with the planning framework, and that includes consideration of the scheme, the zoning, as well as the policy positions. Has already been said today in relation to the streetscape character. I'm comfortable that this proposal is consistent with the emerging and existing streetscape character. The policy position, as I've already spoken today, does encourage and support the massing of the building towards Broadway Street, and particularly in this particular precinct. I think the proposal in moving an element of it that has a variation in height towards Broadway is consistent with supporting the massing towards Broadway. In terms of the rear, the setback and the interface at the rear, I'm comfortable that the proposal and the information provided to us is appropriate, both in terms of setback and in terms of the design treatment, which incorporate landscaping, deep soil landscaping along the rear. It also incorporates other on-structure treatments, including screening and other physical treatments, panelling treatments that also support the interface and the design, as well as the stepping back of the building as it gets higher. Whilst I acknowledge that those elements may differ from the policy I have given due regard to in the context of this site and in the context of the development. In relation to the side setbacks, I would concur with the comments or the variation to the side setbacks as it relates to the policy position. And I note there are provisions, these are augmented provisions from the arcade provisions, and I'm comfortable in this particular instance, consistent with the rhythm of the street and the form of development that is occurring in that area, and I'm comfortable with that variation. Overall, the design is an appropriate development. It enhances and interacts with the street. It is part of a run of buildings that are creating, and has already been cited today, are not just an emerging character and form part of the existing character of the area, and I'm comfortable overall the development is appropriate in its locational context. Those are my comments. Are there any other speakers in relation to this motion? If not, we move back to the mover for right of reply and close of debate.
Very little more to say, thank you, except to reinforce that I think this is a very good development. I think it will be an asset to the city. It's been clearly well designed, well resolved. I think the issues of interface have been well done. I don't think any amount of tinkering at the edges is going to improve measurably at all. It's a very good outcome. I think it will be an asset to the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Right of reply has been completed. We are now going to the vote, inclusive of Amendment 1. All those in favour? Against? It is carried 4-1. Has the minute taker got that? Thank you. I move back to the agenda. There are no Form 2 applications and there are no SAT reconsideration applications. Part C of the agenda, the SAT applications are listed. I have no comments on those, and accordingly I close today's meeting at 10:53 a.m. Thank everybody for their participation.
Thank you. All the best.